Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Gamification and Mixed Reality, Segment 3 on our video broadcast, brought to you from the Center for Teaching and Learning at Humber College here in Canada, where it's a wee bit chilly. It's almost Valentine's Day coming up, and how we love our chocolates. It's actually my birthday today, so wish me a happy birthday. There's a segue of this content, and I kind of forget what it was. That's it. When we anticipate a reward for anything in life, we release a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine, it's a monoamine. It's a neurotransmitter. It's produced in all mammalian species, and we produce a lot of it. And we've known since the 1970s that if you are a gambling addict and you are going to go do a little gambling, a little a drinking addict, and you're going to have a little shot at the end of the day, or if you're a drug addict and you're going to take that needle and satisfy that urge, all of these are causing the release of dopamine. This is called a dopamine drip. And this means that you're going to have some kind of activity that you achieve and you release more dopamine, and that satisfies you. So it turns out that in studies in the video game industry that the dopamine drip is active during video games. So in a typical video game, we have a challenge in front of us. Then we have an achievement, such as killing a little monster or discovering a box or something like this. We release dopamine in our brain. That makes us feel really good, and then we want more challenge because we want more dopamine. And there are video gamers that we've seen in Asia that actually died playing video games. They just wouldn't stop, and days later they found them, fingers curled up around the mouse. I'm not suggesting we hook students in quite that way, but it is that powerful. It's so devious that one of our colleagues in the area of gamification, Gabe Zickerman, has opened up a project called Onward to help with recovery from Facebook and app addiction. There are folks in Silicon Valley that spend all day trying to find ways to make you addicted to their app so you buy Cheesy Puffs. And it's getting to the point where there's a diagnosable entity called Facebook depression that's being treated by colleagues here at the CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health there in Toronto. Dr. Bruce Ballon is a psychiatrist working specifically in the area of Facebook addiction. And this all works off this dopamine cycle. You can see that we have a predicted reward, like I get on Facebook and I'm going to get a like. I put up a little post about what I had for lunch and I get maybe no likes. Or maybe more likes we get. Geez, a whole bunch of likes. I think maybe a couple people will be interested. But it turns out we have a prediction error. So what dopamine does as it regulates the physiology in the brain is it updates your predicted reward. So if you put up a picture of yourself having a Frappuccino, a selfie, and you get 10,000 likes, you'll expect that when you put up Frappuccino pictures, you get more likes. Makes sense? So this is the basically the learning rate, and we can see that we learn more, that actually learning is connected to dopamine, because learning is about predicting rewards. When I learn what the prof wants me to learn, what kind of reward do I get? What's in it pour moi? So there's our good old dopamine. You can see its chemical formula, and it turns out there's a good deal of neuropharmacology to gamification, which involves the release of dopamine. What you try to produce in a good learning game, as in good video games, are what called multiple compulsion loops. What that means is that a good learning game would have a whole bunch of different activities you can do, and that's called a compulsion loop. And you can have a lot of little things that you're doing in the game. Some of the earlier games that we produced that we're going to talk about in future episodes, such as Healer's Quest, that I developed for Ryerson University back in 2002, we had the entire class choose different roles. They broke into teams, and those teams had to cure patients, virtual patients. And the more patients you cured, the more credits and points you got, and then the more efficiently you treated them by using less tests and using better medications, you excelled in the game. So there were an entire virtual world, and we're building this out across a number of institutions right now, what we call virtual hospitals and virtual learning environments, VLEs. And these will integrate with VR, as we'll talk about in future episodes. So again, I want you to understand that when you're using a game system, some kind of game mechanic in the classroom, we're trying to tap into these actions and commitments, dopamine and endorphins. Endorphins are excitement hormones. They're released in our brain when we're really excited about something. We just finished doing some training with Elections Canada. We did work with the Canadian military, Amazon, Google, Intel over the past year. We had members of Elections Canada, the senior level planners, jumping up and down and screaming with delight when they did well in our game, which was designed to help them communicate more effectively with consumers and voter satisfaction. Similarly, we had generals and all kinds of great officers in Cornwall, Ontario, with the Canadian military getting very, very excited about these game mechanics. So if you build these up, you can get teams of people that are working together, whether they're learning or whether they're trying to achieve an objective, and get them so excited about the learning, they're yelling with excitement. If your classroom, if your students were yelling with excitement every time you taught them something new, I think you'd call that a pretty good session and a good day. These networks are rather complex. We don't want to go into this too much here, but the dopamine and serotonin pathways are important to consider here. Dopamine pathways are mostly involved with reward, pleasure, and euphoria. And so basically the junkie is getting a good dopamine hit. And when he doesn't get his heroin, he or she, then their reward levels, their euphoria goes down, and they start jonesing, and they start breaking into cars. So dopamine is so powerful it influences behavior in this kind of reward motivational. However, we also know during gaming that there's the release of serotonin. And just before we get on to this next slide, looking briefly, we see that serotonin controls cognition and mood in some very interesting ways. When people play video games, they feel a sense of comfort. There is an author named Jane McGonigal who wrote a book called Reality is Broken that I really encourage you to read when you get a chance. She has a website called Super Better. Jane is a PhD, I believe, in the area of neuroscience. She was hit. She got into a nasty motor vehicle accident, and she lost some of her cognitive abilities, and she was quite depressed. And she cured herself playing a video game called World of Warcraft. And this is a game where your serotonin and dopamine release are probably very high. You're involved in an open world, but you're communicating with other people and playing with other people in that video game. And this is through the release of serotonin. So, of course, Jane McGonigal has gone on to do a lot of work of using gamification to help people solve real-life problems, such as coping with an illness. Imagine an asthmatic child, for example, using some sort of game to make sure they took their medications on time. There's a game called Snowflake, which is used for debridement of wounds in children. This is a very, very painful procedure where after a burn you have to remove some tissue. And if they play this video game, they don't feel any of the pain because your mind can only be in one place at one time. If it's playing a game, it's not feeling pain. Fascinating work. So these are serotonergic pathways, and these are involved with learning in some really profound ways we might get a chance to get into a little later in the course. But I would think of serotonin as the neurotransmitter that's released in the brain during gaming when you feel warmth and pleasure and happiness. Dopamine is released when you feel this idea of reward for a job well done. So therefore, games fulfill many human needs, such as achievement, altruism, self-expression, competition, cooperation, and recognition. So we really have these very powerful effects that we see in gamification. We have these standard charts, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, and some of you might be sick of looking at. I certainly have seen enough of this. I think we all get the general idea, any of us that have been teaching for anything more than an hour, that if you get students to practice doing something, they're going to remember it a lot better than if you just talk at them. But lectures have a very important role in learning. Lectures can stimulate and can take people to places they'd never imagined. You've got a master of a field talking about their lifetime of experience. Lectures are fantastic. The problem is that the retention rate is a little bit low on lectures, and so that we want to have a blended kind of development. So if you use games, game-based interactive learning, where you're doing, but it's a game where you might get rewards for doing it well in the classroom or teaching others, then you see a much higher uptake of knowledge. And this is a lot of the gamification literature. I think you might be starting to ask a question right now, and that is, okay, that's fine. But in any studies where you compare a course where people played it as a game and they just took it in the regular way, which might be lectures and exercises and readings, is there any difference? And I've got to tell you, there's no real difference in outcomes so far. We're not seeing that people that play games get A's and people that don't play games got B's. That's not true. They're pretty well equivalent in outcomes, so they both work. However, in surveys that we've done and our colleagues across Canada have done over the past 10 years, where we do very detailed research, we have survey monkeys of up to 49 questions we ask students about learning experience. Almost all of them prefer the game-based environment. So there's something about the game, when you make things into a game, that it adds an element of fun and play. And we'll get back to that in our next podcast, a little bit more of these elements of how we build fun and play into learning. So students, especially what we call millennials, are going to get a big charge out of seeing your course in terms of gaming. Now, you're beginning to probably wonder at this point in the series, well, how do I learn how to do this stuff myself? And we're moving toward that. But what I want you to understand right now is just think about some practical skill you want them to have. Suppose it's a course in reading. For our nursing study that we did at the Daphne Coxell School of Nursing, we had 100 students in 2 different groups. And we had them a little game where when you read extra papers, peer-reviewed publications, those publications were worth up to 5% more of your grade. So if you wanted for extra 5 marks, you would have to read these publications. And we had developed a way of auditing it to make sure that they were properly reading the publications and doing a templated feedback form, letting us know the content and their views. And at the end of the day, we got students to read 40 more peer-reviewed journals than they normally would in a course. Now, can you think of any other way to get your students to read 40 more peer-reviewed journals? And these are all at the undergraduate level. And as you all know, it's in grad school that you start looking at journals. Undergraduate is secondary sources, a good deal of it. So to get undergraduates in their final term in a course in family health nursing to do that extra bit of effort with that slight reward of 5 marks, which I'd work hard for, that little tiny bit of gamification element made a big splash in the learning. So you don't have to turn your whole course into a game. You might just find one little thing that you'd want them to do. Suppose it was a baking or cooking class. You'd have them maybe bake or cook some kind of item and maybe have the students produce an item, see how fast they could produce it, have them test to see who can produce it better, have panels of students taste the food, make a little kind of game like The Voice out of it where there's user voting and involvement. You can be creative by simply focusing on practice by doing and turning that into a game element. There's a lot of merits and demerits of lecture method, but I think looking to our early work in these podcasts, that there's a passive element in lecture and passive learning that we want to try to eliminate through game-based learning. That's about it for this segment. On our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about the design of what we call deeper learning games. And this is an area that we've been studying for a number of years called semiotic resonance and avatar development that's been come out of work in multimedia and other studies. Kind of what happens for us in a deep sense as we engage in a game versus traditional learning or integrated with traditional learning. I am off to have a fabulous birthday dinner, and I think my dopamine is ready for a good reward tonight. Have a great week. We'll see you next week on our podcast. Thanks for watching.